Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about a recent proposal that came out of the Professional Ethics Executive Committee on public interest entities and the definition of publicly traded entity. So this is a very recent proposal. It came out on June 15th, and comments are due September 15th of 2023. And this is really around changes that are happening at IESBA, right? And so IESBA, as they write the International Ethics Standards, the AICPA always looks to see where we need to converge. Now, IESBA is a little bit different because when we look at the international standards, they actually have to do their own differentiation between public and private. Whereas here in the United States, it doesn't exactly work like that. And so as a result, we do have to have differences between how we evaluate and how we think about these items. So in the United States, we have separate standard setters who write ethics requirements for their particular entities that they oversee. So, right, the SEC, the PCAOB, the FDIC, the NAIC, right, they have robust standards that are specific for independence for the people who have to follow them. However, typically it only applies to their audits or potentially their review engagements, but not any of the other engagement types that you could be asked to perform. So for example, maybe it's an attestation engagement that is being performed under the SSAEs, which are issued by the AICPA. So while they're an SEC filer for their audit purposes, the attestation standard would still be done under the SSAEs by the AICPA. And so as a result, we wanted to look at, okay, how do we take these differences, the fact that the audits are done elsewhere, but also try to think about, well, what is some of the risk with respect to these independent standards for these standard setters? And so what they decided ultimately to do here was to maintain the categories that IESBA is using, but defer to the regulators when it's for the purposes that they have, right? So because they have already set their independent standards for these audits and for these reviews, we're going to defer to them for that, but we are going to keep this. And so we get two definitions here. The first one is going to be a publicly traded entity. So this is a new definition, and that is an entity that issues financial instruments that are transferable and traded through a publicly accessible market mechanism, including listing on a stock exchange. Now, again, when we look at this, we are going to see certain nuanced differences in the language here because IESBA is going to use the term listed entity as an example here, but we're going to use the term issuer because that's the term we use in the United States. So again, we can't just flat out just bring everything over here and they're going to take that into consideration. So when we take a look at this definition, this is broader than issuers because it also includes certain non-issuers. For example, certain governmental bonds might be included in here, as well as things that are traded on an over-the-counter trading platform. So they're going to have this new definition. But they're also going to revise an existing definition. And so as you can see here, as part of the convergence with IESBA, we're going to have public interest entity. And so this is an entity is a public interest entity when it's within any of the following categories. And they use 4 categories here. And so these are resembling the categories that are retained, obviously, from IESBA. So the first one is, in this scenario, a publicly traded entity whose auditor is subject to SEC rules, right? So again, as we go through this, we're going to be consistent. 2, an entity, one of whose main function is to take deposits, right? So when we're thinking about FDIC type items here, and then an entity, one of whom's main function is to provide insurance to the public. And again, this is the NAIC. And you can see here, they are going to talk about when you're in scope or not in scope, because the NAIC as well as the FDIC has different rules depending on how large, et cetera. And so they're going to mirror the requirements there. But they are proposing a new category in here around what we would call an investment company, right? These are going to be subject to the Investment Act of 1940. And so there are certain exceptions to that, like insurance products, but they were going to include that in the definition. So you can see here, they kind of updated the definition here and then removed some of the existing definition around how to consider other entities. They're a little bit more explicit. However, it says when a member performs a financial statement audit or review subject to the regulatory requirements in A through D, obviously comply with those. Otherwise, if you're following AICPA items, it would be considered a public interest entity. Now, they did consider other entities that could potentially be public interest entities and ultimately decided not to. So pension funds. So as we think about pension funds, these could be things like ERISA items or governmental employee benefit plans, right? So when we think about like GASB 67, 68 time plans. And they decided that the financial condition of the plan is limited to just the participants and not the broader public. And so ultimately decided that they should not include those in a public interest entity. Non-issuer broker dealers, because the SEC doesn't include them in their independence rules. So again, they decided to keep it out. And then not-for-profits and governments, because they're subject to Yellow Book and Yellow Book independence rules. And so while they're not included in the public interest entity, they still have very specific additional and sometimes more stringent rules already for independence. So this is going to update those references to the PIE, but also add the new term around the publicly traded organizations. And the item here is going to be a proposed effective date, which would be for periods beginning on or after December 15, 2024. Early implementation would be permitted, and this again would align with the IESBA ruling here. So PEEC, the Professional Ethics Executive Committee, would love to hear from you. Have they got everything right? Is there some entities that should be included or excluded from these definitions? Did they miss any of the nuances there? So there's actually a pretty lengthy list of questions in this proposal to try to get some feedback here. So I know they would love to hear from you. So if you are so moved, the comments are obviously due shortly. So definitely take a quick look there. So again, thank you guys so much for joining me today on the Genuine Learning blog, and I look forward to seeing you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.